Breath of the Wild? What a trash game. Tears of the Kingdom? Garbage. Ocarina of Time? Ha! Give me a break. None of these games can even hold a candle to Link the Faces of Evil, or Zelda the Wand of Gamelon, or Zelda's Adventure. And quite frankly, Okay, I can't lie about these games anymore. It physically hurts me. We're talking about the Philips CDI Zelda games today, guys. I've avoided it for years, but it's time. And if you've been a fan of the series for very long and you haven't been hiding under a rock for the past couple decades, you know exactly what they are and what they've done and why God allowed them to be made. But if you by chance don't know what the Philips CDI Zelda games are, then please allow me to briefly explain. And feel free to skip ahead using the chapters if you want to get straight to the story of the games directly and don't care about the little history lesson. Did you know that once upon a time people used these cute little circular discs called compact discs or CDs for data transfer? Crazy, right? They were co-developed in 1984 by two technology companies that you'll probably recognize, Sony and Philips. Throughout the 80s and early 90s, these little guys were becoming more and more popular as the new standard for data transfer. So eventually, Philips and Sony took the CD one step further and invented the next version in 1990 called the CDI, with the I standing for interactive. No longer would a CD simply be readable. You could now press buttons and make it do things, which meant running applications live or even the ever more popular video games. This caught the eye of another company you may have heard of, Nintendo, who then partnered with Sony in order to utilize this brand new CDI technology in order to design an upgrade for their already extremely popular Super Nintendo Entertainment System, which used cartridges to play the legendary games like Super Mario World or Super Metroid or The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. The new console was to be called the SNES-CD, or alternatively, the PlayStation. Yes, you heard me correctly. However, Nintendo and Sony couldn't agree on a price split for the new console, and one day after Sony went live with showing off publicly the Nintendo PlayStation at the Consumer Electronics Show in 1991, Nintendo surprised Sony by publicly announcing that they were dropping their agreement with Sony regarding developing the Nintendo PlayStation and instead elected to go with Philips directly. However, after watching Sega release a similar project called the Sega CD console and seeing that bomb in sales, Nintendo lost heart on the project for CDI entirely and dissolved the agreement with Philips as well. The fact that they toyed with both Sony and Philips and pulled out of both deals carried a very heavy toll for Nintendo though, on both fronts. In Sony's case, the president got real mad and demanded that they create the game console anyway to specifically rival Nintendo. And get this, since Nintendo's trademarked name was the PlayStation with a dash, they named their new console the PlayStation. One word. Literally to spite Nintendo. And we see how that turned out. On the Philips side, as a way to make good on dissolving their deal, Nintendo gave them the ability to use some of their trademarked licensed characters however they wanted to, like Mario, Link, Zelda, and Ganon, and thus the Philips CDI Zelda games were made. Granted, not by Nintendo themselves, but with officially licensed Nintendo characters nonetheless. Heavily inspired by the first, second, and third Zelda games as well as the Legend of Zelda TV show. Philips contracted the creation of the first two games out to a Russian company called Animation Magic, whose specialty was animation, ironically. Now this will not be a review video covering these infamous games filled with my jokes and my hot takes. I mean, there have already been so many amazing videos out there doing just that. It will instead be a story recap for all you lore and story fans out there. But regarding how the games feel to play, I will summarize the overall feeling towards them with one quote from the legendary peanut butter gamer himself.
The first thing you'll realize when you turn on the Faces of Evil is that you make some pretty poor life choices.
Well said, Peebs. Well said. Now that we're done with the history lesson, let's talk about what actually happens in these games one by one, and you'll probably want to stick around to the end because after we're done, we're gonna figure out where they fit in on the timeline, and we'll create what will be official fan canon as approved by me, Bandit, the clear leader of what is considered fanon across gaming as a whole. The first CDI Zelda game is called Link the Faces of Evil and takes place in Hyrule, at least initially. The game opens to a wonderfully animated cutscene where Link apparently lives in the castle with King Harkinian of Hyrule and his daughter, and subsequently Link's crush, Princess Zelda. The first thing Link says is that he's bored.
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
Just in general. The king scolds him for craving times of not peace, which is typically a bad thing, which then prompts Link to wonder aloud about what Ganon's up to these days. And lo and behold, at that very moment, a wild wizard appears named Guanum, who flies in on a magic carpet and says straight up that Ganon and his minions have seized the land of Koridai for an unknown reason. The king offers to help, but Guanum states quite clearly that Link is the only one who can defeat Ganon according to prophecy.
It is written, only Link can defeat Ganon.
Well, that was pretty clear. This being music to Link's ears, obviously, he immediately agrees to help out, taking only his sword as equipment and asks Zelda for a kiss before leaving, which she says no to.
You've got to be kidding.
Better luck next time, bud. Guanum then says, "Squadala, we are off!"
Squadala, we are off!
And flies the duo all the way to Koridai Island. And upon arriving, Link looks down and sees a bunch of giant heads all over the place. Evil heads. Guanum then explains to Link that these aren't the Easter Island heads. They are, in fact, the faces of evil, and each of them are run by one of Ganon's goons, with Ganon himself being in control of his own face of evil. Guanum tells Link that he must conquer each one, and that's exactly what he does. Cue the events of the game. At the same time, while Link and Guanum are running around the place trying to beat up all the baddies, Ganon uses the absence of a hero in Hyrule to approach Zelda in her sleep and magically kidnap her, also conveniently trapping her on the island of Koridai, where the hero of Hyrule is. You know, the guy who previously defeated Ganon. Anyway, as Link is now tasked with not only ridding the island of Ganon's goons and the giant evil faces, but also rescuing Princess Zelda, he proceeds to kill each of the minions in control of these faces one by one. First, Goranu, the necromancer, who creates the Stalfos enemies and even disguises himself as Princess Zelda in order to trick Link. Then the pig man named Harlequin, who runs a casino and transforms any who lose all their money to him into monsters, and deflates like a balloon after being defeated.
Lucky shot! Golly!
Then Militron, the large, very blue armored knight who forcefully transforms Caridians into Armos enemies, and who's actually a fat, cowardly old man underneath the armor who says, "Oh my goodness, this is awful.
Oh my goodness, this is awful!
Then the huge green cyclops called Glutko, who eats Caridians alive on camera, just eats them, that Link literally blows up with a bomb. And finally, the werewolf-like humanoid thing known as Lupe, who transforms Caridians into pug-like moblins, and is defeated by Link reflecting their own energy beam back at them. Now, after Link had defeated Glutko, he obtained the legendary Koridai book called the Book of Koridai, that can only be read when given to the reader Apo, who reveals by reading the book that Ganon can only be defeated with the book, which places the Book of Koridai on the same tier of power as other famous relics such as the Master Sword or the Light Arrows. After this, Link finds Guanum's residence, and as a reward is given the Lantern of Vision in order to see and kill or avoid the flying monsters known as Sand Crummies that prevent Link from entering Ganon's lair. After this, Link enters the final face of evil and confronts Ganon, who initially offers to make Link his own face of evil, but is promptly denied this and defeated by Link throwing the book at him, literally, which traps Ganon within its pages, literally. Link then finds Zelda, smacks a gong to wake her up, tells her he saved her, which of course she doesn't believe, and then gets flown back to Hyrule by Guanum on his magic flying carpet. Guanum proclaims that Ganon is once again sealed away, and Link is indeed the true hero of Koridai. And Link asks Zelda if that's worth a kiss at least, which she still says no to. Some guys just can't help striking out. But this doesn't keep him down because Link then says, "I won!"
I won!
And the game ends. The end. The next game, Zelda, the Wand of Gamelon, takes place right after the events of Link, the Faces of Evil. Or maybe it takes place before. It's not really clear since the games released at the same time and have very little to do with each other. The story of Wand of Gamelon is a bit more involved, though. We can assume it takes place after the Faces of Evil since Link was apparently bored at the beginning of that game. Anyway, the game opens up with the familiar setting of Zelda, Link, and King Harkinian again talking to each other inside Hyrule Castle. The king addresses his daughter, telling her that the ruler of yet another island called Gamelon, a man named Duke Onkled, is under attack by the forces of Ganon, and therefore the king himself is going to go help him out, taking the Triforce of Courage with him as protection, which we never actually see. Before he leaves though, since his daughter Zelda was so concerned, he tells her that if he hasn't returned in 1 month, she should just send Link to help out. Impa is also here at this time, and she assures Zelda that according to the flying pyramid-like Triforce of Wisdom, which heavily resembles the Triforce from the TV show giving her a vision, her father would indeed return safely. However, 1 month month passes and her father does not return. So Zelda, having lost her faith in the Triforce, sends Link, like her father said, who gleefully runs off to adventure, but also does not return after an unknown amount of time, possibly another month. This prompts Zelda to pull a Thanos and say,
"Fine, I'll do it myself."
And thus, she and Impa set off to the island of Gamelon to search for her father and Link, prompting the events of the game. While she's adventuring sword in hand across the island of Gamelon, though, the Triforce of Wisdom tells her and Impa that Ganon has captured many of the Gamelon inhabitants, including her father, although Link's whereabouts are unknown, even to the Triforce apparently. So naturally, Zelda sets out to free the Gamelonites and her father, and along the way encounters several of Ganon's top minions, such as Gibdo, who is an intelligent Gibdo that Zelda faces in a church playing the organ and enslaving the living, and who is defeated when she throws a blanket over him. She then faces Iron Knuckle, who has enslaved many residents of the island town called Sakado, and defeats him using the Power Glove. After this, she faces a trio of witches, known as the Three Witches, who froze the fairy pool and its subsequent fairies and covered the forest in darkness, who are defeated pretty easily by Zelda's sword, freeing the fairies and lighting up the forest once again. Next, she faces a Wizrobe who has trapped a lady known as Lady Alma, and similarly to Lupe in the Faces of Evil, has to be defeated by reflecting its own power against it with Zelda's reflecting shield. When Lady Alma is freed, she explains to Zelda that she actually met Link before, who gave her his canteen in exchange for a kiss. And when asked for clarification from Zelda regarding this exchange, refuses to elaborate and gives Zelda Link's canteen. After this, Zelda travels to Duke Onklid's castle called Dodomai Palace. Who comes up with these names? Seriously. Sorry, Dodomai Palace, and faces another powerful wizard named Hekton, who imprisoned a man known as Lord Kiro, who tried to stop Ganon from capturing Zelda's father. After defeating Hekton and speaking with Lord Kiro, he reveals to Zelda and Impa in a wild plot twist that Duke Onklid is actually the one who's working with Ganon and betrayed King Harkinian, leading to the king's capture, and nobody saw this coming. Lord Kiro then tells Zelda the secret to entering Onklid's locked chamber in order to confront him regarding her father, the king. Onklid cowers at the terrifying sight of the blood-bathed Princess Zelda and reveals that Ganon and therefore her father are holed up in Rizong Palace. However, before Zelda can face and defeat Ganon, a forest-dwelling lady named Myra tells Zelda that the only way to defeat Ganon is by using the legendary Wand of Gamelon, which is the legendary artifact that the game is named after, and also gives her the fairy lantern that will penetrate the magical darkness around Ganon, allowing Zelda to see him. However, in order to obtain the mythical Wand of Gamelon, Zelda has to retrieve it from within the Shrine of Gamelon, which is guarded by the most powerful of Ganon's minions so far, a shape-shifting creature known as Omphak, who, when defeated, explodes into a murder of crows. With the legendary Wand of Gamelon in tow and Omphak sleeping with the fishes, the crows, Zelda breaches Rizong Palace and confronts Ganon by shining the fairy light on him, engaging in combat. Eventually, she is able to use the wand on him, which places Ganon in chains, and then inside a book. Probably the Book of Korodai, since it pops up out of nowhere and it's the literal same reused animation from the Faces of Evil, which also gives credence to the theory that it takes place after the Faces of Evil. Zelda's then able to free her father, and Lord Kiro brings the traitor Duke Onklid before the king for punishment, which the king decides is to have him scrub all the floors in Hyrule, which is either a really easy punishment or a really difficult one. At this point, Zelda remembers that Link exists and wonders aloud whatever happened to him. And Lady Alma, who is here, apparently, states that Link was a boar while looking at herself in the mirror, caught up in her vanity. This apparently annoys Zelda, and she snatches Lady Alma's mirror out of her hand and throws it away, smashing it against a wall, which shatters the mirror and subsequently releases Link back into the world, who has no recollection of anything or how he got there. This implies that Lady Alma is the one who came on to Link, asking him for a kiss, and when Link refused her, was deemed boring to her, and she then magically trapped him inside her mirror. And also she stole his canteen. Sounds like a great first date to me. After this, the king and Zelda share a touching moment of laughter and everyone has a feast. The end. Now, the final Philips ZDI Zelda game, called Zelda's Adventure, was developed and contracted out to a different company entirely called the Viridis Corporation, and was released 2 years after the first two in 1995. As such, it has a drastically different appearance from the other two games, with the in-game sprites being real images, and the backgrounds being realistically designed art, and the cutscenes being actual on-camera acted out videos instead of the charming hand animation of the previous games. It also makes the first two games look like masterpieces, which is saying a lot. Anyway, it takes place in the land of Hyrule, but specifically the southeastern region called Ptolemaic, and this mention of Hyrule along with the appearance of Link, Zelda, and Ganon are its only connections to the other two games, which means it's also unclear whether or not it takes place before them, but we can assume after since it was the third and final release. Regardless, it opens up with a cutscene on a new character, Hyrule's court astronomer named Gaspra, who is said to be very wise. Gaspra receives a letter from a woman of Ptolemaic named Shermac, telling him that Ganon has stolen the 7 celestial signs of Termac and plunged the land into an age of darkness. Oh, and also he captured Link. So Gaspra, being old and wise, decides to call upon a brave adventurer hero person to reclaim the 7 celestial signs of Termac and rescue the land from the age of darkness. Oh, and also rescue Link. Naturally, he summons Zelda by way of his magical crystal, which he uses to send Zelda to and fro within the land of Termac. I'm not kidding, you even see him talking to Zelda as her POV inside his tower and then witness him fling her towards the final destination at the end of the game. This actually looks kind of familiar. Anyway, long story short, Zelda, under the guidance of Gaspra and Shermac, explores the land of Ptolemaic and meets many people along the way, and also enters the 7 elemental shrines and defeats the 7 evil Ganon minions known as the Shrine Keepers, who are each guarding a celestial sign, and they are Lort, Pasquinade, Aviana, Malmord, Aguanda, Ursary, and Warbane, each time recovering one of the celestial signs and returning to Gaspra's tower to be sent to the next area. However, just before she recovers the 7th and final celestial sign, a wild hand shadow appears, preventing her from doing so, Ganon's hand shadow. After this, Gaspra urges her to track down and defeat Ganon and sends her careening down an opening at the Vision Hen, which is the initial starting point of the game and the proper resting place of the celestial signs. Within this crack that she descended into, she once again faces each Shrine Keeper and must defeat them all back to back, before finally encountering Ganon himself, who looks like he got a makeover and hit the gym a few times since the last time we saw him. Once he's defeated, he spins so fast that he turns into a tornado and breaks apart piece by piece, after which the land of Ptolemaic is restored, and Link is rescued, and we see him for like 2 seconds, and both Hyrule and Ptolemaic enter the Age of Lightness. Gaspra then speaks to Zelda one last time, telepathically, and urges her to be kind. The end. Do you need a second? Because you can take a second, I understand. Trust me, I had to script this stuff. Anyway, now that we've gone over the entire story of each and every amazing Zelda CDI game, and presumably we're all still alive, and if you survived, you're clearly better off now that you know all this stuff, let's put the cherry on top and come up with our own fanon of where the CDI games best fit on the timeline. As you know, the Zelda timeline splits into 3 after the events of Ocarina of Time, before which Ganon and his original human form Ganondorf did not exist. So to me, this means that clearly the CDI games take place somewhere after Ocarina of Time. The question is, which timeline? Naturally, I'm prone to assume that it takes place in the Downfall timeline, since that is technically the original timeline of the first 3 Nintendo Zelda games, which the CDI games were based off of. We can also see many similarities and influences from the original 3 games as well, such as Link's hero tunic and the appearance of classic enemies such as moblins or gorillaz. And obviously, there's the appearance of Ganon, who was only ever permanently Ganon in the Fallen timeline. Combine all this with the fact that it is in Hyrule and not New Hyrule like the adult timeline would require, and the fact that there's no specific tie-in to the child timeline, I would say that a Fallen timeline placement is a pretty safe assumption. The only remaining question being, where in the Fallen timeline? Well, let's recall what one of the first things Link says in the Faces of Evil is.
I just wonder what Ganon's up to.
The fact that he knows who Ganon is and he's welcome in the castle, but also that he's bored, means that he has fought and banished Ganon before, also proven by Guanum's words at the end of the Faces of Evil.
Well done, Link. Ganon is once again imprisoned.
And as such, Link is now welcome in Hyrule Castle as the hero of Hyrule, a setup that's also extremely similar to the setup of the Legend of Zelda TV show. With it being the same Link that has clearly faced Ganon before, this means that it clearly takes place right after one of the games on the Fallen timeline, and it can't be A Link to the Past or Link's Awakening or the Oracle games because those games each took Link away from Hyrule. So I believe the first 2 Zelda CDI games take place right here, after Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Because after all, that is the game that led Link to discover the hidden Triforce of Courage, which we know King Harkinian is in possession of in the Wand of Gamelon. Clearly, they knew that Ganon had been revived somehow after Link's adventure, and the rest just adds up. There is also the possibility that this guy Glutko is the evolution of the Frox monsters from Tears of the Kingdom. I mean, the resemblance and appetite is uncanny. So possibility number 2 is that the CDI games actually take place in the distant future after Tears of the Kingdom. And the third CDI game either takes place after those two immediately or is even further distanced by an unknown amount of time and is therefore another incarnation of both Link and Zelda, but I digress. Thank you so much for struggling with me and watching the complete story recap and timeline theory of the Philips CDI Zelda games. I have finally covered them on the channel, so now I never have to again. Please consider leaving a like on this video if you enjoyed this content somehow, or if you feel bad for me putting myself through this. Subscribe if you haven't already for much more gaming lore, some of which actually even matters. Huge thanks as always to my Bandit crew who make my day every day, and that's all I've got in this one. Follow me on my socials, and I'll see you next time. This is Bandit, signing out. Peace!